Agatha Raisin and the Bride of Odley Cruesis Manor. Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's mystery. Agatha Raisin arrived at Odley Cruesis Manor expecting a quiet weekend among wedding guests. But the serene gardens hid a sinister secret. A bride collapsed mid-ceremony, lifeless. Calm and observant, Agatha scanned the crowd, noting whispered tensions, hidden glances, and subtle betrayals. Something told her this wasn't an accident. Who among them could kill so quietly? Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Drop your answer in the comments. I always enjoy learning more about our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe. It will motivate me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and begin tonight's story.
Chapter 1. An Invitation to Intrigue. Agatha Raisin had just settled into her favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea steaming gently on the side table, when the post arrived with its usual predictable assortment of bills and catalogs. But today, nestled among the mundane, was a cream-colored envelope, heavier than a mere note, and embossed with gold filigree that immediately suggested elegance and perhaps a touch of mischief. She plucked it from the pile, turning it over in her hands as though it were a fragile piece of porcelain rather than paper. The handwriting was precise, almost theatrical, curling in a way that demanded attention. "Odley Cruesis Manor," she murmured to herself, raising a brow. The name was vaguely familiar, not from scandal or gossip, but from the faint whispers of the social pages she occasionally indulged in while pretending to ignore them. Odley Cruesis was a place of subtle notoriety, grand, imposing, and rumored to have secrets tucked into every ornate corner. Agatha's curiosity ignited. She tore open the envelope with careful precision, unwilling to mar its elegant design, revealing a letter that smelled faintly of lavender and old parchment. The words danced across the page, formally inviting her to the wedding of Ms. Lavinia Harcourt, a wealthy socialite, and a gentleman whose name she scarcely recognized. The letter hinted at an exclusive guest list, promising a weekend of refinement, exquisite dining, and, it seemed, subtle intrigue. There was even a sentence tucked into the margins, almost like an afterthought. "Certain truths lie beneath polished facades, for those willing to observe." Agatha's lips twitched in a half-smile. Well, that was an invitation designed precisely for her. She placed the letter against her cheek for a moment, inhaling the scent of paper and lavender, and imagining the sprawling estate it represented. Her mind began cataloging the possibilities. The guests, the staff, the hidden conversations, the subtle rivalries that inevitably flared in such elegant settings. Already she could picture herself gliding through the grand hallways, noting the slight hesitations in a smile, the nervous twitch of a hand, the glimmer of something concealed. Each detail would speak volumes if one knew how to watch. Exclusive guest list, family secrets, hidden tensions, she murmured, eyes scanning the elegant handwriting again. Agatha's mind worked almost involuntarily, teasing out connections, potential alliances, and subtle jealousies. Her curiosity was especially piqued by the faintly cryptic tone of the invitation. It wasn't simply a call to a wedding, it was a challenge to her sense of observation, a whisper that perhaps the weekend would not be entirely predictable. Perhaps there was a story waiting behind those polished doors, one that demanded the precise combination of discretion and wit she had cultivated over years of quiet scrutiny. Agatha placed the letter on her knee, tapping the edge thoughtfully with her finger. She could already hear the imaginary murmur of servants bustling in the background, the clink of fine china in drawing rooms, and the low hum of delicate intrigue amongst guests. There was a thrill in the anticipation, the gentle but insistent pull of curiosity that made her pulse just a little faster. It was not danger she sought, not yet, but the promise of subtle mysteries, concealed tensions, and human nature laid bare in its most refined form. Finally, she leaned back, letting the weight of possibility settle around her. A weekend at Odley Cruesis Manor promised more than social pleasantries. It offered puzzles, nuances, and glimpses behind velvet curtains. Agatha Raisin had never been able to resist such invitations, not when her love of observation and innate curiosity were stirred so deliciously. She sipped her tea, already imagining the weekend to come, a plan forming in her mind. Arrive, watch, note, and perhaps discover a secret or two tucked away where only the keenest eye might notice. The envelope sat neatly beside her, a subtle, tantalizing promise, a weekend of elegance, and perhaps, just perhaps, of intrigue. Agatha stood in her modest but impeccably organized bedroom, suitcase gaping open like a patient animal waiting to be fed. She surveyed her neatly folded clothes, her collection of scarves arranged by color, and a selection of shoes that might have been considered excessive by anyone else, but which she deemed essential. The wedding at Odley Cruesis Manor promised elegance, subtle intrigue, and, most importantly, a chance to observe human behavior in its most refined and revealing form. Naturally, this required careful preparation. "Oh, the decision between navy and teal," she muttered, holding up 2 dresses in front of the mirror. "One whispers sophistication, the other quiet confidence. But does either scream keen observer of secrets?" She laughed softly at her own dramatics, the sound mingling with the gentle ticking of her bedside clock. Selecting outfits was never just a practical matter for Agatha. It was an exercise in presenting oneself as both approachable and slightly enigmatic, an unspoken invitation to reveal confidences. Her contemplation was interrupted by the shrill peal of the doorbell. With a sigh, she set aside the dresses and padded to the door, opening it to find Mrs. Bloxby from next door, clutching a basket of freshly baked scones. "Off on another adventure, I hear," Mrs. Bloxby chirped, eyes twinkling. "Planning to charm the entire countryside into spilling their secrets, I suppose?" Agatha raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "One does what one must, Mrs. Bloxby, and you know me. Observing is half the fun." "Oh, we all know, my dear," the neighbor replied with mock seriousness. "Just don't come back engaged in some romantic entanglements or carrying someone else's secrets home like a shopping bag." They shared a laugh before Mrs. Bloxby departed, leaving Agatha to resume her packing, now with a heightened sense of anticipation. She carefully folded the dresses, selecting the teal one for the journey, reasoning that subtlety often worked better than brilliance in observation. A neatly organized pouch of toiletries went next, along with a small notebook she used to jot fleeting thoughts or peculiar observations. A well-worn magnifying glass, more sentimental than practical, slipped into a side pocket, just in case. As she packed, her mind wandered back to the invitation, recalling a small, odd detail she had almost overlooked, a barely legible watermark on the crest, faintly resembling a serpent entwined with a rose. Curious, she traced it with her finger, pondering the possibility that it might signify family secrets, rivalries, or a hint of scandal. That tiny observation gave her a thrill, the sensation that even in refinement, subtle danger and intrigue could be lurking beneath polished surfaces. The doorbell rang again, this time revealing her neighbor, Mr. Pritchard, who leaned on his cane with exaggerated solemnity. "Ah, Miss Raisin," he said, a teasing glint in his eyes, "don't go falling into any romantic entanglements this weekend. We can hardly afford another story in the village papers about your escapades." Agatha chuckled, taking the tease in stride. "Fear not, Mr. Pritchard. I'll keep my heart and my detective instincts equally vigilant." Once alone, she zipped the suitcase with satisfaction and placed it by the door, glancing around her room with a mix of anticipation and amusement. She could already imagine the subtle interactions, the whispered rivalries, and the delicate web of tensions she would encounter at the manor. A weekend that promised elegance, gentle suspense, and the thrill of observation awaited her. She poured herself a cup of tea, letting the warm aroma soothe the flutter of excitement in her chest. Finally, she slumped into a chair by the window, notebook in hand, pen poised for notes she might take on the journey. She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The path to Odley Cruesis Manor was more than a physical journey. It was a venture into observation, subtle investigation, and a hint of adventure. And Agatha Raisin, ever watchful, was ready.
Chapter 2. Arrival at Odley Cruesis. The carriage rattled along the winding driveway, each turn revealing more of Odley Cruesis Manor's grandeur. Agatha Raisin pressed her gloved hands to her lap, her eyes scanning the sprawling estate with careful curiosity. The manor rose like a statement of wealth and subtle menace, its tall windows glinting in the afternoon sun, and its stone facade adorned with ivy that had clearly been tended with obsessive care. She noted the intricate carvings above the entrance, the heavy double doors polished to a mirror-like sheen, and the delicate banners fluttering in the light breeze, announcing a wedding that would, no doubt, conceal far more than it revealed. Stepping down from the carriage, Agatha Raisin adjusted her hat and swept her gaze over the gathering guests. They formed clusters along the manicured lawn, exchanging delicate pleasantries that carried undercurrents of rivalry. She caught the nervous flutter of the bride, Miss Lavinia Harcourt, whose hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet. The groom, a tall man with an impeccably tailored suit, stood aloof, his expression carefully neutral, yet betraying a trace of impatience. Both were perfect for observation, and Agatha filed them away in her mind with the efficiency of a librarian shelving precious volumes. Nearby, a small group of women whispered and laughed, their eyes darting across the crowd. Agatha noticed subtle gestures, a hand brushing a strand of hair behind an ear with unnecessary precision, a slight stiffening of posture, as if to control a spill of emotion. She smiled faintly to herself. High society was all about appearances, and everyone carried secrets under silk gloves. Even the children playing by the fountain had their own little dramas, chasing each other with shrieks that masked minor tiffs and sibling rivalries. Her attention was drawn to a hallway near the main doors. Something small glinted in the sunlight, a folded piece of paper tucked under a potted fern, or perhaps a delicate trinket dropped in haste. She made a mental note. It might be nothing, but in her experience nothing was ever truly nothing at Odley Cruesis. The sight sparked a thrill of curiosity, an immediate sense that this weekend would hold more than polished smiles and flowery speeches. As she moved through the entrance hall, Agatha couldn't resist a quiet internal commentary. Really, must the gentlemen insist on standing as though carved from marble, while the ladies practice expressions of serene delight as if rehearsed for posterity? She mused with gentle amusement. Every exaggerated gesture, every carefully timed laugh offered her clues, and she was good at noticing them, far better than anyone who simply skimmed the surface of such gatherings. A servant approached with a polite bow, offering her a small, ornate card bearing her room assignment. The card was heavy with embossed lettering, elegant yet impersonal. She tucked it into her handbag, another small piece of the weekend's puzzle. She moved on, glancing at the floral arrangements, the polished staircase, and the gleaming floors, noting how each detail served to enforce an illusion of perfection. And yet, as always, she sensed the undercurrent of tension, an invisible current of anxiety, rivalries, and concealed motives. At the far end of the hall, she noticed a figure lingering in the shadows, a guest whose demeanor suggested observation rather than participation. He carried himself with a quiet precision, scanning the room with the kind of scrutiny that matched her own. Agatha filed this mental note carefully. Some people were interesting simply because they notice everything, and that often meant they had something to hide. By the time she reached the grand staircase, Agatha had catalogued faces, gestures, and small telling details. She straightened her posture, adjusted her hat once more, and allowed a faint smile to play on her lips. This was going to be an intriguing weekend indeed.
Once her luggage was delivered to the suite, a spacious room overlooking the East Gardens, Agatha set about exploring the manor with deliberate curiosity. The corridors were long and winding, lined with portraits of dour ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her every move. She traced her fingers along the polished banisters, noting the subtle nicks and scratches in the wood, evidence that, even here, not everything was handled with flawless care. A faint draft suggested hidden passages or poorly sealed windows, both equally intriguing to someone who thrived on observation. She wandered toward the library, the door slightly ajar as if inviting her in. Inside, shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes. Their spines cracked, and gold leaf faded from repeated handling. Oddities filled the spaces between books. A porcelain fox with a missing ear, a clock that ran backwards, and a small glass case containing what looked like antique keys and trinkets. Agatha's eyes lit up. "A perfect playground for secrets," she murmured, making mental notes of each object, imagining which might become relevant in the days ahead. Glancing at the windows, she noticed the garden stretched endlessly, meticulously arranged flower beds intersected with gravel paths, topiaries shaped into whimsical animals, and a fountain at the center where water danced like liquid crystal. Birds flitted about, and a few guests wandered the grounds, some in quiet conversation, others with distracted expressions that suggested unspoken worries. Agatha catalogued each behavior carefully, the subtle stiffening of shoulders, the forced smiles, the careful avoidance of certain eyes. Passing through a sunlit hallway, Agatha spotted a folded note peeking from beneath a heavy settee. She stooped discreetly and retrieved it, noting the elegant handwriting and the faint scent of lavender. The contents were cryptic, merely a few lines hinting at a past disagreement and a promise to reveal truths at the proper time. She tucked it into her pocket, knowing that such small discoveries often led to larger revelations. She exchanged pleasantries with the staff, polite, efficient, yet faintly wary. Each bow, each careful word choice suggested familiarity with the manner's undercurrents and an awareness that the weekend would be anything but ordinary. One maid, glancing nervously over her shoulder, muttered something about family tensions, and Agatha's ears perked up. Subtle clues, easily dismissed by the casual observer, were her specialty. Further along, she noticed a guest lingering near the grand staircase, pacing slowly and glancing repeatedly toward the library. The air of unease around him was palpable, and though he attempted casual conversation with others, his eyes betrayed a preoccupation with something unseen. Agatha made a mental note to observe him more closely. In her experience, the unusual behavior of one often signaled the tip of a much larger iceberg. By the time she returned to her room, she had traced several corridors, peeked into every common area, and catalogued interactions with an almost forensic attention to detail. The manor was beautiful, yes, but it was alive with hidden currents, rivalries, anxieties, and the faint hum of secrets waiting to surface. Agatha's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Every corridor, every library shelf, every carefully trimmed shrubbery offered potential insights. She made a final note in her notebook, careful to record impressions without drawing attention, and sat by the window, sipping her tea, letting the late afternoon sunlight warm her face. Settling into the quiet hum of anticipation, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Odley Cruesis Manor was more than a venue. It was a stage set for intrigue, and Agatha Raisin, ever observant, intended to notice everything.
Chapter 3. Wedding Day Whispers. The first light of the wedding day streamed through the tall windows of Odley Cruesis Manor, casting a warm glow over the bustling morning. Agatha Raisin, still in her neatly pressed dressing gown,
watched the activity from a comfortable chair near the window. The air was thick with the scent of roses and fresh linens, but beneath the floral sweetness, a subtle tension hummed, one that only someone attuned to human behavior could detect. Bridesmaids hurried past in a flurry of silk and ribbons, occasionally colliding with each other in small, apologetic bursts. Agatha observed quietly, noting each expression, each hurried glance. The bride, Miss Lavinia Harcourt, fussed over her veil, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the delicate lace. Lavinia's smile was perfectly practiced, but her eyes flickered nervously toward a guest who lingered near the doorway, a distant cousin with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. Agatha's mind catalogued the exchange. A subtle shift in posture, the way the cousin's fingers brushed against a folded fan, something about it was off. Secrets, perhaps, hidden beneath the veneer of civility. A maid tripped over a basket of flowers, sending petals scattering across the polished floor. Agatha stifled a small chuckle, amused by the minor chaos. She had witnessed enough weddings to know that the combination of nerves, perfectionism, and high expectations often produce these tiny comical disasters. Yet even in this chaos, she noticed details others missed. The slight crease in a bridesmaid's gown, a necklace worn backward, the way a boutonniere appeared hastily pinned. Each irregularity was a note in the symphony of preparation, a small clue to the personalities at play. Agatha's attention shifted to the side table, where a small, ornate box had been set aside. She recognized it immediately as a family heirloom, one that ought to have been displayed prominently rather than tucked away. Her curiosity piqued. She leaned closer, noticing the faint scratch along the edge, a mark suggesting haste or perhaps a minor struggle. The box might be nothing, but in a house like this, even trivial details could unravel into something far more significant. Across the room, a bridesmaid dropped a ribbon, and the bride bent to retrieve it. The cousin, who earlier drew Agatha's attention, whispered something into Lavinia's ear. Lavinia's eyes widened briefly, then she nodded and smoothed her expression into perfect composure. Agatha's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. High society rituals, she mused, often concealed far more than they revealed. Observing was an art, and today promised ample opportunity. The aroma of breakfast drifted from the adjoining kitchen, mingling with the scent of perfume and freshly polished shoes. Agatha sipped a cup of tea, letting the warmth soothe the slight tingle of anticipation in her chest. She noted the way the staff moved with quiet efficiency, the way they exchanged glances that carried unspoken concerns. Each interaction, no matter how minor, was a thread weaving a tapestry of family dynamics, social tension, and hidden intentions. Finally, the bride took a deep breath, and the room fell into a temporary hush as the dress was secured, the veil adjusted, and every last detail attended to. Agatha, pen poised in her notebook, recorded subtle observations: the tremor in a hand, the fleeting glance exchanged, the odd placement of an heirloom box. These small, seemingly insignificant moments would matter later, she knew. Settling back in her chair, she allowed herself a quiet moment of satisfaction. The manor hummed with anticipation, and Agatha Raisin, ever observant, was ready to notice every nuance, every whispered exchange, every tiny hint of intrigue hidden amid the morning chaos. The wedding day had begun, and with it, the subtle, unfolding mystery. The garden was alive with color, the carefully tended flower beds bursting in shades of lavender, rose, and cream. Guests gathered on white folding chairs arranged in neat rows, their murmurs blending with the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional trill of birds. The sun shone gently, casting a warm glow over the scene, and for a moment everything seemed perfect, until the bride stepped forward to begin the vows. Miss Lavinia Harcourt was radiant in her gown, a vision of elegance and poise. Yet as she raised her eyes to meet her groom's, a subtle tremor passed through her, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention. Agatha noticed instantly. The delicate fan in Lavinia's hand quivered slightly, and her fingers, pale and slender, pressed against her bouquet with unusual tension.
Agatha's mind catalogued each detail, noting how the bride's perfect composure masked a tremor of something deeper, nervousness perhaps, or something more sinister. The officiant began speaking, his voice calm and steady, drawing attention back to the ritual of the vows. Guests leaned forward, some nodding politely, others smiling with mild impatience. Then, in an instant, Lavinia's knees buckled, gasps rippled through the crowd, chairs scraping, and the orderly rows dissolved into chaos. She collapsed into the arms of the nearest bridesmaid, her bouquet tumbling to the ground, petals scattering across the white linen. While panic spread like wildfire, Agatha remained poised, her analytical mind already at work. She noted the positions of each guest, the subtle hesitations and glances exchanged. A gentleman near the front leaned too quickly forward, his hand brushing a nearby chair in a way that suggested urgency or concealment. Another, a distant cousin, froze for an unnaturally long moment, as if debating whether to intervene or remain still. Agatha filed every expression in her mind, her observations moving faster than the chaos around her. "Is she—" someone whispered, voice trembling. Agatha caught the trailing edge of the question and gently adjusted her scarf, as if unconcerned, though her senses were alert. She crouched slightly, observing Lavinia's posture, the angle of her head, the faint flush on her cheeks. Nothing yet suggested permanent harm, but the inconsistencies were already apparent. Why had the bouquet been gripped so tightly? Why did the bridesmaid hesitate for a split second before supporting the bride? A small, unusual object lay half hidden in the grass near the fallen bouquet. A tiny vial, delicate and translucent. Agatha's pulse quickened with curiosity, though she kept her expression calm. The placement seemed accidental, but in her experience, accidents in high-stakes settings rarely were. Her gaze swept over the gathering once more, noting who had approached Lavinia immediately, who had lingered, and who had exchanged brief, almost imperceptible looks. The groom knelt beside his bride, attempting to soothe her, while a staff member hurriedly brought water. Agatha observed how each guest reacted, the faint stifled laughs from those who misread the situation, the clenched jaws of others, and the subtle avoidance of eye contact by someone at the back. Every movement, every pause, every glance offered potential insight. By the time Lavinia had been helped to a nearby bench, breathing slowly and recovering, the immediate crisis had passed. But Agatha's mind was already piecing together possibilities. This was not merely faintness. It was a message, a signal, or perhaps a test. The incident carried questions that needed answering, and she, as always, would notice what others did not. Sitting quietly at the edge of the chaos, Agatha Raisin allowed herself a moment to sip the tea she had carried discreetly. Her eyes, sharp and unrelenting, scanned the garden once more. Every shadow, every gesture, every object could be a clue. The wedding, outwardly a scene of elegance and joy, had revealed a crack, small, subtle, but unmistakable, and Agatha knew instinctively that it was only the beginning.
Chapter 4. Gathering Clues. By mid-morning, Odley Cruesis Manor had regained a semblance of order, though the atmosphere remained charged with subtle tension. Agatha Raisin moved through the rooms with measured purpose, notebook in hand, observing each guest, staff member, and family member with the keen eye of someone accustomed to reading between the lines. Every gesture, every hesitation, and every carefully chosen word was catalogued, like clues in a delicate puzzle only she could piece together. Her first stop was the sitting room, where a group of bridesmaids lingered, still whispering about the earlier incident. Agatha approached casually, her voice gentle. "Good morning. I hope Lavinia is feeling better." The girls nodded, faces bright with practiced composure, yet their fingers twisted anxiously at hems and napkins. One, a young woman with auburn hair, offered a statement that sounded rehearsed. "Oh, yes, just a little faint from nerves, nothing more." Agatha made a small note. Her posture was rigid. Her eyes darted to a corner of the room where a folded paper had clearly been glanced at, but quickly hidden. In the hallway, Agatha spotted the discarded vial from the garden. She bent to examine it discreetly. It was empty, faint traces of a clear liquid inside catching the light. Odd, she thought. Completely out of place, yet unremarkable enough to be ignored by anyone else. A potential clue, or a diversion. Either way, it demanded attention. She slipped it into her notebook's side pocket, intending to analyze it later. The Manor's staff were her next subjects. Agatha approached a housemaid who stood nervously near the staircase. "Did you notice anything unusual this morning?" she asked lightly. The maid's eyes flicked to the floor. "No, miss, just the usual fuss, you know." But Agatha's intuition noted the slight tremor in her voice, the way she clutched her apron. Something was left unsaid. She filed the observation carefully. Servants often knew more than they let on, their knowledge veiled by courtesy and fear. Agatha then moved to the library, where she found the bride's personal effects neatly arranged on a side table. A small velvet-covered box caught her attention, partially opened to reveal a delicate locket. The engraving inside bore initials that did not match the groom's, an anomaly she mentally flagged. Nearby, tucked behind a stack of books, she discovered a folded note with hurried, almost frantic handwriting. The words hinted at tension, unspoken grievances, and a promise to reveal truths soon. Agatha's pulse quickened, not from alarm, but from anticipation. Each discovery was a thread she could follow, connecting disparate hints into a coherent pattern. Her final stop before the luncheon was the drawing room, where the groom and several older relatives conversed in subdued tones. Agatha observed a cousin lean in too closely, whispering in a voice meant to be unnoticed. The groom's polite smile did not reach his eyes, which flicked toward the library and then away, betraying unease. A tiny detail, a gold cufflink, slightly mismatched, caught her eye. It was minor, almost trivial, but with her experience, Agatha knew that small imperfections often signaled deeper secrets. As she retreated to a quiet corner to review her notes, Agatha reflected on the day so far. Lies, half-truths, and evasions were strewn throughout the manor like breadcrumbs. The hidden note, the odd locket, and the mysterious vial all were pieces of a larger picture that demanded careful scrutiny. She sipped her tea, allowing the warmth to steady her thoughts. Patience and observation would reveal more than frantic questioning ever could. Agatha Raisin had begun her investigation in earnest, noting behaviors, objects, and subtle contradictions with meticulous attention. Each discovery was another hint, each hesitation a potential clue. She allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. The web of intrigue at Odley Cruesis Manor was complex, yet entirely decipherable, if one knew how to watch.
After a brief pause in the drawing room, Agatha decided to continue her exploration of Odley Cruesis Manor, guided less by plan than by instinct. Every hallway promised potential secrets, and she moved with quiet precision, her shoes whispering across polished floors. The manor seemed alive, each creak of wood and flicker of shadow hinting at stories untold. Agatha's curiosity was piqued. This weekend might offer more than surface-level intrigue, and she intended to uncover every hidden thread. A narrow corridor, partially obscured by a tapestry of a hunting scene, caught her eye. She tugged it aside, revealing a door with an ancient brass keyhole. Her brow arched in mild amusement. "A secret passage! How quaint!" she murmured. Gently turning the handle, she found it locked, though a faint draft suggested the room beyond had been used recently. Agatha made a mental note to return with the proper tools, or the right moment. Some mysteries, after all, required patience. Continuing on, she discovered a small study tucked behind the main library, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. The desk contained several locked drawers. With a discreet glance around to ensure no one was watching, she gently tugged at one. It resisted. Agatha chuckled softly. "Well, one cannot expect everything to be freely offered," she mused. A small notebook, partially wedged between the drawer and the desk, slipped free and landed lightly on the carpet. Its pages contained sketches and notes detailing interactions among guests in the days leading to the wedding. Observations of whispered arguments, fleeting gestures, and unspoken tensions filled the pages, an inadvertent map of the manor's hidden currents. In a corner of the study, a delicate figurine of a horse caught her attention. At first glance, it seemed innocuous, but a closer inspection revealed a tiny engraving at the base, a date and initials that did not match any present guest. Agatha's mind raced. A seemingly insignificant object had suddenly gained weighty implications, suggesting the presence of old rivalries and family secrets. As she wandered further, she stumbled upon a small vestibule leading to the gardens, its walls lined with faded photographs. Agatha bent to examine them, noting subtle expressions that hinted at conflicts now buried but not forgotten. Some faces were stern, others anxious. A few seemed to exchange glances laden with unspoken knowledge. Even the garden beyond, with its neatly pruned hedges and whimsical topiaries, seemed charged with past tension, each path and shadow a stage for discreet confrontations and long-held grudges. Amid her observations, a faint, almost comical sound made her pause. A tiny door at the base of the wall creaked open, revealing a minuscule storage niche containing
Chapter 5. Suspicions and Red Herrings. The evening settled over Odley Cruesis Manor, like a velvet curtain, softening the light, yet intensifying the subtle tensions that threaded through the guest rooms and drawing rooms. Agatha Raisin moved among the clusters of guests with her usual blend of charm and keen observation, sipping a delicate cup of punch as snippets of conversation floated through the air. Whispers of the morning's fainting incident had already become embellished rumors, each retelling layering new suspicion, while others spoke in hushed tones of past rivalries or imagined grievances. Agatha tilted her head, noting every inflection, every small twitch of expression. One aunt insisted Lavinia had merely overexerted herself, yet her hurried glance toward a nervous cousin suggested otherwise. A distant uncle, speaking loudly to cover his own embarrassment, contradicted his earlier assurance that nothing unusual had occurred. Agatha jotted each inconsistency into her notebook, appreciating how lies and misstatements often contained more truth than the speaker intended. A tray of canapés was passed among the guests, clinking plates and delicate cutlery punctuating the tension. One guest dropped a fork near a small envelope tucked beneath a napkin, and Agatha, crouching discreetly, glimpsed an ornate card sealed with wax. The writing was elegant, yet cryptic, hinting at a warning or a secret, though the context remained unclear. She filed it mentally as a potential lead, though she knew better than to assume its significance just yet. Nearby, a discussion of distant family properties grew heated, voices rising above polite restraint. Agatha noted the way hands gestured subtly, eyes darted to others, and smiles tightened in unnatural ways. Social faux pas were abundant, spilled drinks, mispronounced titles, and an ill-timed sneeze. But each minor embarrassment served as a distraction, a clever mask behind which tensions hid. She allowed herself a quiet smirk. Even in the midst of chaos, one could learn far more than polite conversation ever revealed. Her attention was drawn to a gentleman lingering near the fireplace, fidgeting with a pocket watch that clearly seen better days. He claimed to have been reading in the library all afternoon, yet a faint trace of floral perfume clung to his coat, likely from the gardens where Lavinia had fainted. Agatha filed the discrepancy quietly. Someone was misrepresenting their whereabouts, whether by accident or design, and she intended to follow the thread. Meanwhile, another guest clutched a folded note, glancing repeatedly toward a small group of relatives. The message appeared urgent, though its content remained hidden. Agatha's curiosity tickled. She could sense the note's potential importance, but also knew it might be a clever misdirection, a red herring meant to draw attention away from the truth. The challenge was to separate the trivial from the significant, the real from the feigned. Across the room, a young woman spilled a glass of wine in her nervousness, the liquid seeping onto an expensive rug. Gasps and whispered apologies followed, yet Agatha noted how quickly some guests diverted their attention, masking relief
or perhaps embarrassment. Each minor incident revealed more about character than any direct statement could. The Manor's evening was a tapestry of contradictions, unspoken tensions, and faint hints of intrigue. By the time dessert was served, Agatha had catalogued inconsistencies, odd gestures, and unusual objects with meticulous care. While nothing yet demanded immediate action, each observation deepened her understanding of the social currents and potential motives at play. Even amidst red herrings and whispered accusations, her mind worked steadily, piecing together the puzzle one subtle clue at a time. Agatha Raisin, observing from a quiet corner, allowed herself a small smile. The guests might believe they controlled the narrative of the evening, but every glance, every misstep, and every whispered secret had already been noted, and she, as always, would notice what others overlooked.
The manor was hushed under a moonlit sky. The gardens and corridors bathed in silvery light. Agatha Raisin, fully aware of the propriety that insisted she remain in her room, nonetheless felt compelled to investigate. With a small lantern and her notebook in hand, she moved silently through the hallways, alert to every creak of wood, every distant whisper, every faint shift in shadows. Night rendered the manor both familiar and unfamiliar, a place of quiet beauty laced with hidden threats. She first ventured to the library, drawn by curiosity about the small pile of papers she had noticed earlier. The air was cool, scented faintly with old parchment and polished wood. Agatha's eyes fell on a half-burnt letter lying in the fireplace's ash. Carefully, she retrieved it with a gloved hand, noting its charred edges and a few legible phrases. "Cannot allow, will regret, tomorrow will change everything." The fragmented sentences suggested urgency, secrecy, and perhaps fear. She tucked it into her notebook, mentally comparing it to the earlier cryptic messages she had found. Moving along the corridor, Agatha noticed a faint glimmer of fabric caught in the edge of a rug. Kneeling, she discovered it was torn silk, a fragment of a gown or perhaps a sleeve. Its delicate weave suggested it belonged to someone of high status, likely the bride or one of the more fashionable guests. Agatha's mind raced. Why had it been torn? Was it a minor accident or evidence of a scuffle? The thought tickled her curiosity, yet she maintained her composure, aware that the night afforded her the advantage of unseen observation. The hush of the manor was punctuated by subtle, almost imperceptible sounds. Footsteps echoed faintly across the upper hall, halting abruptly near a closed door. Agatha froze, holding her breath, eyes narrowing in anticipation. She approached slowly, noting impressions in the soft carpet that suggested someone had moved with care, yet hurriedly. The prints were peculiar, a combination of small, light steps and heavier, irregular ones, hinting at more than one individual or a single person attempting to disguise their movements. Curiosity mingled with mild amusement as she explored further. In a corner of the hallway, a cupboard slightly ajar revealed an assortment of objects that had been hastily shoved aside. A candlestick, a pair of gloves, a small key. Agatha mused quietly. The manor seems determined to keep its secrets, yet it is far too careless to hide them well. She catalogued each item, noting placement, condition, and possible relevance to the unfolding puzzle. A faint draft drew her to a partially open window overlooking the east gardens. Moonlight illuminated the pathways below, the gravel glinting faintly. Agatha knelt to examine the ground, spotting tiny impressions in the soil, nearly imperceptible but distinct, footprints that led from the garden towards the library, then vanished abruptly beneath the hedges. She traced their trajectory mentally, pondering their origin and purpose. Someone had been out there under the cover of darkness, and their intent was unknown, but certainly deliberate. By the time she returned to her room, her notebook was brimming with observations, sketches, and questions. The night had yielded half-burnt letters, torn fabric, mysterious footsteps, and peculiar objects,
each a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Agatha settled into her chair by the window, sipping a calming cup of tea, letting the quiet seep into her bones. The manor in its moonlit slumber seemed at once serene and conspiratorial. Agatha Raisin allowed herself a small, wry smile. Even in apparent calm, she knew the weekend's mysteries were far from over, and she would notice every subtle clue before anyone else could.
Chapter 6. Confrontations and Revelations. Agatha Raisin sat in the quiet of the library, the soft glow of the reading lamp illuminating her notebook, now filled with meticulous observations, sketches, and fragments of overheard conversations. The manor had finally settled into a subdued hum, though the echoes of earlier chaos still lingered in her mind. She leaned back, sipping her tea, and began to trace connections between the clues she had gathered: the fainted bride, the torn fabric, the half-burnt letter, the mysterious vial, and the odd behaviors of various guests. Each incident, previously isolated, now hinted at a deeper, entwined story. She began with the fainting incident. At the time, it seemed like simple nerves, or perhaps an accident, but the hurried glances exchanged, the subtle hesitation of the bridesmaid, and the cousin's frozen expression suddenly formed a pattern. Agatha noted how the bouquet had been gripped too tightly, the locket with unusual initials, and the cryptic messages tucked into drawers and corners. Someone had created a control scenario, yet left small traces behind, either through oversight or intentional misdirection. Turning her attention to the half-burnt letter, she reread the fragmented sentences. "Cannot allow, will regret. Tomorrow will change everything." When cross-referenced with the torn silk fragment she had found and the footprints in the garden, a clearer narrative emerged. Agatha realized that someone close to Lavinia had attempted to stage a minor incident, perhaps as a warning, yet the faint traces of intent left a trail for a careful observer to follow. The realization brought a slight thrill. Her mind was piecing together a puzzle that others dismissed as coincidence. She catalogued each guest's behavior, noting inconsistencies in alibis and subtle contradictions in statements. The aloof groom had claimed to be reviewing details in his room, yet traces of floral perfume on his sleeve suggested otherwise. The cousin with sharp features had appeared in 2 locations within minutes, an impossibility unless movement had been concealed. Even minor gestures, the flick of a hand, the tightening of a smile, averted gazes, began to form a map of motives and opportunity. Agatha allowed herself a small wry smile. Human nature, after all, was predictably unpredictable. Agatha then focused on family dynamics, recognizing long-simmering tensions between Lavinia and certain relatives. A hidden heirloom, misaligned initials, and whispered arguments painted a portrait of jealousy, rivalry, and past grievances. Patterns that seemed trivial earlier now carried weight. Each micro-moment became a building block of the larger picture, revealing who might have reason to manipulate, frighten, or mislead the bride. As she mapped the connections on paper, the earlier subtle foreshadowing came into sharper focus. Guests who had seemed innocuous now revealed hidden agendas. Objects previously dismissed as mundane held symbolic significance. The web of intrigue stretched taut, and Agatha could almost feel the threads vibrating beneath her fingertips. Her mind raced through possibilities, weighing evidence, discarding red herrings, and reconstructing events with a clarity that felt almost cinematic. Finally, she leaned back and surveyed the library, letting the room's quiet reinforce her deductions. Each detail, no matter how small, had contributed to a narrative hidden beneath the surface elegance of Odley Cruesis manor. Agatha Raisin allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. She could see the outline of the truth forming, the logic of motives and actions aligning with an almost inevitable precision. The confrontation would be delicate, but the path was clear. Tonight, she thought, the puzzle would begin to reveal itself fully, and she, ever observant and quietly cunning, would ensure that nothing, no glance, no whisper, no secret remained unnoticed.
By late afternoon, the manor's drawing room was filled with an expectant hush.
Agatha Raisin, notebook neatly tucked under her arm, had summoned the principal guests under the pretext of an informal discussion about the day's events. The fireplace cast a warm glow, highlighting polished wood and gilded frames, while outside, the gardens shimmered in the soft golden light. Agatha's eyes flicked over each face, noting the tension, curiosity, and faint relief at being summoned to the comfort of her company. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm yet commanding attention, "I believe the recent incident requires some clarification." A few nervous coughs punctuated her words, but she ignored them, letting the silence emphasize her point. "Through careful observation, I've pieced together a series of events that explain both the fainting of the bride and the peculiar disturbances noted throughout the manor." She paused, allowing her audience a moment to consider. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others tried to appear nonchalant, though their eyes betrayed interest. Agatha began with the minor clues: the half-burnt letter, the torn fabric, and the footprints discovered under cover of night. She recounted her observations of gestures, contradictory statements, and hidden interactions, each detail delivered with subtle wit that elicited occasional smiles or small gasps. "The fainting," Agatha continued, "was not a mere accident, nor the result of nerves alone. Someone sought to frighten Lavinia, perhaps to influence her decisions, or reveal a secret prematurely. The torn silk and floral scent indicate an attempt at staging the scene." She let the information settle, observing reactions. Eyes widened here, a hand clutched a napkin there. The room was quietly riveted. With a deft glance toward the groom and the nervous cousin, Agatha moved to the heart of the matter. It became clear that a family member with long-standing grievances, misunderstandings, and rivalries carefully concealed had both motive and opportunity. A combination of haste, miscalculation, and overconfidence left enough traces for a careful observer to reconstruct events. She gestured to the previously hidden objects: the small vial, the folded note, and the locket with unusual initials. These, while seemingly trivial, were crucial in revealing the truth. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as she named the culprit: a distant cousin whose envy of Lavinia's inheritance and perceived social advantage had driven the schemes. Agatha outlined the cousin's actions, the subtle misdirections, the planted notes, and the manipulated interactions, demonstrating how each inconsistency she had noted aligned perfectly with the culprit's plan. Paled faces blinked in disbelief, and the guilty party attempted to protest, but the calm, methodical explanation left little room for evasion. Even the minor faux pas, the spilled drinks, mispronounced titles, and misplaced accessories now took on humorous significance. Each quirk of the guests and family members added levity to the resolution. High society is often more theatrical than dangerous, though occasionally both in equal measure. By the end, the room exhaled collectively. Relief mingled with amusement, and the central tension of the weekend dissolved into laughter and murmured congratulations to Agatha. She allowed herself a satisfied smile, noting how the truth, once obscured, had emerged clearly through observation, patience, and careful deduction. As the guests dispersed, some whispering apologies or incredulity, others shaking their heads at their own oversights, Agatha lingered by the window, watching the sunlight ripple across the gardens. The manor had yielded its secrets, its hidden tensions resolved, and the weekend's intrigue had reached a satisfying conclusion. Quietly, she sipped her tea, thinking of the many small details that had brought clarity, and of the subtle joy in seeing order restored.
Chapter 7. Aftermath and Reflections. The morning sun streamed softly through the tall windows of Odley Cruesis Manor, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the golden light. Agatha Raisin sipped her tea in the library, enjoying the rare quiet that had settled over the house after the previous day's revelations. The guests were stirring, breakfasted, and wandering the corridors in small clusters, their conversations a mix of polite reflection, whispered gossip, and occasional laughter. Agatha leaned back, letting her keen eyes wander over the shifting social tapestry, noting how quickly manners and alliances adapted to new truths. By the breakfast table, the distant cousin, the one whose schemes had caused so much tension, sat with a sheepish expression, mumbling apologies to relatives who, though outwardly composed, could not entirely conceal their amusement. Agatha smiled to herself. Human nature, she reflected, had a predictable rhythm, even amid scandal. Some were relieved that order had returned, while others quietly nursed bruised egos, all providing her with ample entertainment and insight. Guests whispered about the events, speculating on the minor details that had initially gone unnoticed: the half-burnt letter, the torn silk, and the oddly placed trinkets in the hidden corners of the manor. Agatha overheard a particularly dramatic retelling of the fainting incident, exaggerated for comedic effect, and couldn't help but chuckle at the theatrics. The social ripples were subtle but undeniable. Alliances shifted, apologies were exchanged, and grudges, long simmering, were tempered by the satisfaction of a resolved mystery. Walking through the corridors, Agatha paused at a doorway where a young maid, curious yet hesitant, had set out fresh linens. She noticed a small decorative ribbon that had been used to mark an important envelope the night before. With a quiet smile, Agatha tucked the detail into her mental notes. Even in calm, overlooked items often carried echoes of prior intrigue. It was the minutiae, she mused, that often told the richest stories. Outside in the gardens, the sunlight revealed the soft dewdrops on carefully pruned hedges and flowering bushes. Guests ambled along gravel paths, chatting in low tones. Some lingered near the fountain, casting amused glances at one another, replaying the events in their minds. Agatha observed subtle gestures, a lingering hand on a shoulder, a conspiratorial glance, a gentle blush of embarrassment. Each nuance offered a reminder of the complex interplay of personalities she so enjoyed deciphering. Her reflections turned inward. Agatha considered her own role in the events, the satisfaction of noticing what others overlooked, and the quiet thrill of assembling scattered pieces into a coherent picture. There was joy, she realized, not just in uncovering secrets, but in appreciating the richness of human behavior, the quirks, foibles, and little victories of observation. A well-solved puzzle, after all, was as much about understanding people as the evidence itself. As she returned to the library, Agatha noticed a small slip of paper tucked behind a vase. A leftover note, perhaps, forgotten in the excitement. It carried nothing urgent, just a few playful doodles by one of the children guests, yet it brought a soft smile to her face. Even in a house filled with secrets and tension, small, humorous details persisted, offering warmth and reassurance. Agatha Raisin settled back in her chair, letting the sunlight and quiet envelop her. The manor had returned to a gentle calm, the social dynamics adjusted, and the puzzle resolved, though, as she well knew, minor mysteries and small rivalries always lingered beneath the surface, ready to spark another day of intrigue. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction, enjoying the cozy balance of order, observation, and human nature's endless, entertaining unpredictability. The manor gardens were bathed in a soft, late-afternoon glow, the air rich with the scent of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. Agatha Raisin strolled along the winding gravel paths, letting the gentle crunch of her footsteps accompany her thoughts. The weekend's events played back vividly in her mind: the fainting bride, cryptic notes, mislaid objects, and the eventual unmasking of the culprit. Each moment, once chaotic, now seemed like a carefully choreographed dance of human emotion and subtle intrigue. Agatha paused at a stone bench overlooking a small pond, its surface reflecting the dappled sunlight like a fragment of liquid gold. Dragonflies skimmed the water, and birds chirped with the casual indifference of creatures untouched by human schemes. She settled herself on the bench, folding her hands over her notebook and letting her gaze wander over the hedges and flower beds. There was a serenity to this place, a calm that contrasted beautifully with the tension of the previous days. As she walked, her eyes caught a small, peculiar item half buried near a patch of lavender, a tiny silver locket engraved with initials she did not immediately recognize. Curious, she retrieved it, turning it over in her hands. Though it seemed insignificant, There was something deliberate about its placement, as if someone had left it behind intentionally. Agatha tucked it into her pocket, smiling wryly. Manor secrets, she mused quietly, have a way of surfacing in the most delicate forms. The winding paths led her past a line of manicured hedges, where small hidden alcoves offered private spaces for contemplation or whispered conspiracies. She noted the subtle footprints in the soft soil, likely from last night, and the faint scent of garden herbs disturbed by hurried passage. Each small observation reminded her that even in calm, the manor retained its mysteries, waiting patiently for someone curious enough to notice them. Agatha allowed herself a few moments of introspection, reflecting on the weekend's social dynamics, how quickly alliances shifted, how minor deceptions could be so convincingly hidden, and how easily a guest might misinterpret a gesture or comment. She smiled, thinking of her own enjoyment and observing and connecting the dots, the thrill of understanding human nature in ways others never suspected. Even humor had played a part. The spilled drinks, nervous tittering, and minor faux pas that had softened tense moments, creating a weekend rich with both suspense and amusement. The locket in her pocket reminded her that curiosity never truly rested. Who had left it, and why? Was it a simple forgotten item, or a subtle hint of a new unfolding story? Agatha's mind, ever active, catalogued the possibilities with quiet satisfaction. For a detective, the world was never entirely settled. There was always another clue, another character, another miniature intrigue waiting just beyond the edges of perception. A gentle breeze stirred the lavender, carrying the faint aroma of roses and the crisp promise of evening. Agatha breathed deeply, savoring the moment of stillness, the harmony of nature, and the subtle delight of knowing she had seen more than most, understood more than many, and solved yet another puzzle with her characteristic mix of patience and keen observation. As the sun began its slow descent behind the distant hills, Agatha rose, smoothing the folds of her skirt and tucking the notebook securely under her arm. She allowed herself one last glance at the gardens, the hidden corners, the glinting pond, and the flower beds that held both beauty and secrets. Today's mysteries were resolved, but tomorrow might bring new curiosities, and she was, as always, ready to notice them first.
Chapter 8. Returning Home. The carriage rattled gently along the winding country lane, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on stone providing a soothing cadence. Agatha Raisin sat upright, her hat slightly askew from the morning bustle, and allowed herself a moment to reflect on the whirlwind weekend she was leaving behind. Odley Cruesis Manor receded in the distance, its spires and gilded windows softened by the early morning mist, and with it the echoes of whispered secrets, hurried gestures, and subtle intrigues. She smoothed the folds of her travel coat and sighed contentedly. The fainted bride, the torn silk, the cryptic notes, all now formed a tidy narrative in her mind, each incident a piece of the elaborate puzzle she had untangled. Agatha mused on human nature as the scenery passed, how small rivalries flared into significant tensions, how minor misunderstandings could snowball into complex schemes, and how easily appearances could deceive. It seems, she thought wryly, that people are predictably unpredictable, yet endlessly entertaining. The other passengers, a small group of familiar villagers returning from assorted visits, chattered softly about local events, oblivious to the subtleties Agatha had noted. A neighbor recounted a tale of a mislaid hat, drawing chuckles, while another fretted over a misplaced invitation. Agatha allowed herself a quiet smile. Even amidst grand mysteries, the rhythm of daily life persisted. She made mental notes of small patterns in behavior, quirks she might later recount or exploit in future investigations. As the carriage meandered past fields dotted with grazing sheep and hedgerows trembling with the light breeze, Agatha's thoughts returned to the manor's guests. She pictured the aloof groom practicing his stiff, formal manners, the cousins' embarrassed attempts at normalcy, and Lavinia's relieved laughter at finally regaining composure. Subtle social intricacies now seemed charming rather than vexing, and Agatha savored the humor woven into each personality. She scribbled a few quick sketches in her notebook, capturing small expressions and gestures that had struck her as particularly telling. Her mind also lingered on the peculiar locket she had discovered in the gardens, still safely tucked in her coat pocket. Its presence was a gentle reminder that, even when the main mystery had resolved, the world was littered with smaller, unanswered questions. Perhaps it was an innocent keepsake, perhaps a clue to future intrigue, but either way, it was a token of curiosity, a bridge to adventures yet to unfold. Agatha found satisfaction in knowing that mysteries never truly vanished. They simply waited for the right observer to notice. The countryside unfolded in a comforting rhythm, with the sun casting warm gold across fields and hedges. Birds called from hedgerows, and the faint scent of wildflowers drifted in through the carriage window. Agatha closed her eyes for a moment, letting the serenity seep into her bones, a soft contrast to the tension of recent days. She reflected on the lessons she had gleaned, not just about deception and motives, but about the enduring charm of human idiosyncrasies. By the time the carriage approached Carsley, Agatha felt a gentle sense of completion. The manor, the wedding, the unraveling of schemes, all were tucked neatly into memory, accompanied by the humor, observation, and satisfaction that only a successful investigation could bring. She allowed herself one last glance at the passing scenery, thinking of subtle clues, patterns, and peculiarities she might explore another day. With a quiet smile, she prepared to return to the familiar comfort of her cottage, her mind already alert to the next adventure, quietly waiting around the corner.
Agatha Raisin unlocked the door to her cozy cottage in Carsley, the familiar creak of the hinges welcoming her like an old friend. The faint aroma of lavender sachets and polished wood greeted her, and she stepped inside, setting down her travel bag with a sigh of relief. The weekend at Odley Cruesis Manor had been a whirlwind of social intrigue, subtle rivalries, and clever deductions. And now the gentle familiarity of home felt like a balm to her senses. She moved through the sitting room, taking in the neat rows of books, the well-loved armchair by the window, and the small collection of curious trinkets that decorated the mantel. From her coat pocket, she retrieved the tiny silver locket she had found in the manor gardens, turning it over thoughtfully in her hand. With a faint smile, she placed it atop the mantel beside a delicate porcelain figurine. It would remain there, a quiet reminder of the weekend's revelations and the subtle mysteries that lingered, unresolved and waiting. Agatha settled into her favorite chair, a cup of steaming tea balanced carefully in her hands. She allowed herself a moment to savor the peace, the quiet ticking of the clock providing a gentle rhythm after days filled with tension and observation. Yet her mind could not help but wander back to the manor. The whispered conversations, the fleeting glances, the minor secrets that had yet to be fully revealed. Even in calm, Agatha's curiosity remained alive, a quiet pulse beneath the comfort of her domestic sanctuary. She reflected on the characters she had encountered, the aloof groom, the nervous cousin, the fainted bride, and the array of eccentric guests who had left such vivid impressions. Each had offered glimpses into human nature, behaviors both amusing and instructive. Agatha noted how minor details, easily overlooked by others, had shaped her understanding of the weekend's events. She allowed herself a small chuckle at the memory of spilled drinks, mispronounced names, and the cousins' awkward attempts at composure, all of which had added color and humor to the otherwise tense unfolding of events. Her thoughts drifted to the tiny mysteries that remained, like the silver locket. Who had left it there, and why? While its presence had not altered the main course of events, it carried a subtle promise of intrigue, a reminder that in the world Agatha inhabited, curiosity never rested. Perhaps another weekend, another gathering, would reveal its purpose, and she allowed herself a quiet anticipation of the next opportunity to observe, deduce, and untangle the delicate threads of human behavior. Agatha glanced around the room, noticing the small comforts that made her cottage a haven, the soft cushions, the warm glow of the lamp, and the tidy collection of books and notes that chronicled previous adventures. Each item told a story, both of past mysteries and of a life lived with careful attention to detail, humor, and curiosity. She felt a satisfying sense of continuity, as if each case, each encounter, built upon the last, weaving a tapestry of experiences both gentle and stimulating. As the evening deepened, Agatha sipped her tea and gazed out the window at the quiet village streets. The cottages glowed softly under lamplight, the scent of wood smoke drifting in from chimneys, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked lazily. She allowed herself a soft smile, thinking that the world was full of mysteries, some urgent, some minor, but all deserving of careful attention. Her eyes lingered on the locket, gleaming faintly in the lamp's light, a hint of stories yet to unfold, quietly waiting for her next investigation. For now, however, Carsley was home, peaceful and familiar, a place where Agatha could savor her observations, relish her small triumphs, and prepare, ever gently, for the adventures that lay ahead.